That. The old mute button got me. Well, good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, wherever you may be. I'm joining you from the New York metro area, where we just got 2 feet of snow dumped on us, so I'm looking forward to shoveling out later. But for now, we're going to discuss, as Lori mentioned in our title slide, let me go back there, leverage Microsoft Azure Active Directory to improve security and reduce costs. This talk is focused at the government space, so we'll be highlighting how Azure Active Directory fits into Zero Trust framework within the gov space, but again, how it can help improve security while reducing costs as well. By way of introduction, for those that may not be familiar with Oxford Computer Group, Oxford Computer Group is a Microsoft partner based out of the Bothell, Washington, which is a stone's throw from Redmond, where Microsoft is headquartered. We have a long track record of providing identity and access management, identity governance, device management, security, and other services to Fortune 500 and also to the government sector and healthcare. We have a 17-year track record deploying these identity and hybrid identity solutions, started mainly back in the early 2000s with Microsoft Identity, what is now known as Microsoft Identity Manager, then as Identity Lifecycle Manager, and then Forefront Identity Manager to the product that it is today, which is still deployed in many of our customers' locations for hybrid identity, along with, of course, Azure Active Directory as a cloud identity provider. We have 900 plus enterprise projects delivered around the world, and over 7 million Office 365 seats deployed. We've been named Microsoft Partner of the Year on a number of occasions. And we have a deep experience implementing Microsoft and Microsoft partner solutions. I myself am a principal architect with Oxford Computer Group, been with the firm for about 5 years. Background, 25 years in information technology, largely in infrastructure, compute, network, and storage. But for the past 5 years, I've been focused on security and the enterprise mobility and security suite. So we started a discussion with talking about, of course, the shifting world that we live in. Not only is the state of unprecedented economic uncertainty, but many organizations, including government agencies, are facing constrained resources, and of course, an uptick in security challenges. Of course, that was highlighted by this week's revelation that a very widespread and deployed solution from one security vendor had been compromised, and several government agencies, Treasury and Commerce, to name just a few, found that their networks had been compromised by an advanced persistent threat, nation-state attacker. And so, not only do we see this, of course, in the private sector, but in government as well, where the nature of the work has changed, the nature of the security breaches and the cost of those breaches has changed. And on top of all that, the tools that we've had in place for many years, these conventional security tools and frameworks and models have not kept pace with this shift. All those trends taken together, we just add up to many IT security challenges, and organizations are finding themselves responsible for protecting a crisscrossing web of technologies, many of which they may not outright own or manage. And with so many devices, different user groups, and data that needs to be protected, that traditional based perimeter security model simply can't keep up with the sophistication and the scale of today's threats. Layered on top of that complexity, of course, is the complex mix of security solution providers that are trying to address particular needs. Many have adopted for a long time the best of breed approach to purchasing and implementing these tools, essentially saying that for every security need, you're required to purchase the best of breed solution. But of course, as we've seen, that's not always the best model, the best way to attack of the problem. Simply creating these silos, more silos, that require specific skill sets that are not inherently designed to integrate with other solutions is just not the best way to navigate the complexity that we find ourselves in today. So a new approach to security with identity at the center, of course, is needed. And that's where Zero Trust comes in. Zero Trust is not a new concept. It's been around for about 10 years or so. But the idea behind Zero Trust, which again is not a product, not essentially a solution, but a set of principles, is where we see a lot of organizations shifting to. Zero Trust provides a modern security framework to manage the complexity that we discussed before, and Microsoft has committed to a holistic Zero Trust approach. The main tenets of Zero Trust of verify explicitly, which basically is stating that rather than trust users or devices implicitly because they're on an agency network that's been trusted, we want to assume that the request originates from an uncontrolled network. We want to authenticate and authorize based on all available data points, including user identity, location, device, health, service or workload, data classification, and other anomalies. Using least privilege is another one of Zero Trust's principles, which states that rather than provide any authenticated user broad access to these resources, we should grant access to people only when they need it, for as long as they need it, and for the specific task at hand. Least privilege access grants just-in-time and just enough access with risk-based adaptive policies that protect both data and productivity. And finally, we want to assume breach. As they say, the saying goes in for the private sector, there's two types of companies, those that haven't breached and those that just don't know it yet. So we should operate with the expectation that a breach will occur or has occurred. We can apply techniques such as microsegmentation and use real-time analytics to detect attacks more quickly. This always vigilant mindset helps to be proactive to soften the impact of breaches when they do occur. Because Microsoft believes that organizations need to embrace Zero Trust, the technologies that Microsoft has built have Zero Trust as a heart of the products and services. The integrated solutions offered by Microsoft offer built-in Zero Trust controls so you can implement the security model at scale and across the entire digital estate. So we're going to take a look at how Microsoft security technologies, in particular Azure Active Directory, can help in the federal government space and as it relates to the federal frameworks that have been defined. So as far as Zero Trust governance in the federal space, it's defined by essentially three frameworks, those being NIST, Publication 800-207, which provides a framework for designing a Zero Trust architecture and network strategy. Trusted Internet Connections, which is a federal cybersecurity initiative to enhance network and perimeter security across the United States federal government. The TIC initiative is a collaborative effort between the Office of Management and Budget, or OMB, and the Department of Homeland Security, Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA, and the General Services Administration. The TIC 3.0 Volume 3 Security Capabilities Handbook provides various security controls, application, and best practice for risk management in federal information systems. And finally, there's Continuous Diagnostics and Mitigation, or CDM, which is a program led by CISA. The CDM program delivers cybersecurity capabilities across the federal government, including providing cybersecurity tools, services, reporting, and best practices. The Continuous Diagnostics and Mitigation Program fact sheet outlines 5 key program areas, including dashboarding, asset management, identity and access management, network security management, and data protection management. So how are these federal frameworks applied in Azure? Well, Azure is using key elements from each of these frameworks to align requirements for implementing Zero Trust architectures. And the first focus is identity and access management. It's going to be the focus of our discussion today. Azure Government has developed a 12-step process for securing identity and access management in federal information systems, which is aligned with the identity management principles within the NIST publications mentioned before, 800-207, the Office of Management and Budget, and CISA, Zero Trust frameworks. Microsoft has several offerings to support identity management in Azure, including Azure Active Directory, Azure Active Directory Identity Protection, and Azure AD Privileged Identity Management. This diagram essentially shows that the 12 steps to implementing Zero Trust Identity and Access Management principles, starting with step 1 as a foundation of employing an identity management system. And some of the others that we'll look at today in some detail have to do with, for instance, step 3, conducting user account provisioning, step 4, control user authentication, 5, implement secure authentication, and 6, evaluate credentials and authentication. But all together, following these 12 steps, agencies are able to implement Zero Trust identity management principles by leveraging Microsoft Azure tools, particularly centered around Azure Active Directory. If we take a closer look at each of the frameworks that were outlined. So for instance, NIST 800-207, we see there are 4 key areas that we focus on when it comes to identity and access management. First being access to resources, which is determined by policy, including observable state of user identity and the requesting system, and may include those behavioral attributes. Microsoft's implementation for that key area can be found in step 8, determine user access to resources, and Azure AD and its ability to use identity and access management fulfill that role. An identity management system, as we mentioned before, step 1, of course, that's the system responsible for creating, storing, and managing user accounts and identity records. Well, that will satisfy step 1 of that framework, employing an identity management system. User authentication has to do with the cycle of access, scanning, assessing threats, adapting, and continuously authenticating. Step 4, control user authentication using Azure AD Conditional Access and other authentication means fulfills that role. And then, of course, there's user provisioning. So stronger user provisioning and authentication policies that need to be in place before moving to Zero Trust alignment. Azure AD fulfills that, and that fulfills step 3 of conducting a user account provisioning, and that can be done both manually and also, of course, in an automated fashion. OMB TIC 3.0, or Trusted Internet Connections, again has its identity management principles of least privilege, secure administration, strong authentication, and adaptive access controls. And Azure AD, along with privileged identity management, are able to fulfill each of those principles in steps 9, 10, step 5, and step 11. And finally, CDM, its principles of identity and access management, trust determination, credentials authentication, and security-related training, again, can be implemented. The only sort of outlier here is step 12 of that perform continuous training, and that's actually Microsoft implementation is Microsoft Learn, which is a library and a resource of continuous learning on these various technologies. So, as mentioned, since that network perimeter is disappearing and things are moving to the cloud, Microsoft Azure Active Directory as the identity control plane is a key and central part of any Zero Trust security strategy. Today, identity has become a core part of security. And it's the control plane that connects everything and gives you visibility into your entire digital estate, ensures that only the right people have the right access to the right resources, and keeps the bad actors out. Azure Active Directory is a universal identity platform that helps you manage and secure all of your users and external identities and access to all of your applications that are being used in the environment. Deploying Azure Active Directory requires that administrators enable a baseline, requires administrators to enable baseline security features to create a more secure and easy to use foundation. And Azure Active Directory is designed to be able to connect to HR systems. There are several cloud HR systems that it connects with natively, but of course, other HR systems can be connected by use of other tools, hybrid tools, namely Microsoft Identity Manager as an example, or Active Directory, of course, which is still in use as a on-prem directory platform, can be synchronized with Azure AD in order to provision those user accounts. And then as far as applications and cloud-hosted application platforms, Azure AD is able to provision user accounts out into those environments as well to provide that strong user provisioning solution. In addition, Azure AD as not only being able to connect cloud-based SaaS applications, is also designed to work with existing on-premise applications, legacy applications that are still on the on-premises perimeter-based networks. This can be done by leveraging the Azure AD App Proxy, which is an agent-based solution that connects on-premise applications to Azure AD and gives administrators the ability to apply those same policies, authentication and authorization policies to those on-premise applications, or through the secure hybrid access model using partner tools such as Citrix NetScaler, F5, delivery controllers, Akamai, and Zscaler to provide user access to those on-premise applications, which previously users may have needed to use a VPN or VDI solutions in order to access those applications. Azure AD provides a streamlined process and mechanism for managing all applications in the cloud, streamlining access for users with single sign-on, and improving app discoverability for users so that users don't have to hunt down the application they need to use. They can be presented to them in an easy-to-use application portal, which of course will increase that productivity. And Azure AD as an identity provider goes way beyond just Microsoft Office. It at one point was the identity service for Office 365, but today Office 365 is just a fraction of the applications that Azure AD can connect. It's not just meant for Microsoft. It can connect any app in Azure AD and can be accessed across the entire environment. And today there's over 2 million applications that are integrated with Azure AD, and that number continues to grow. Talked a little bit before about that simplified end user experience. So the My Applications portal is that portal for making it easy for users to access their applications. That experience, the My Apps portal experience is fully integrated with the Office 365 portal, so users can have a consistent way to find all of their applications, not just Office applications. Users can be empowered with single sign-on. They can launch any application they are authorized to access with just a single click from the My Apps portal. That one-stop shop provides a truly seamless experience for end users, making it easier than ever to deploy new apps across the entire organization or dedicated employee groups. You can streamline how users access all their on-prem and custom apps empower users to manage app credentials and preferences. For instance, for applications that are designed to, with just a credential pair, you can use password vaulting and allow users to store those for their applications. You can create filters and filter apps by functional groups with collections, and create a consistent user-friendly experience that lets employees securely and conveniently launch all the apps with just a single click. When it comes to providing adaptive access, as stipulated as one of the tenets of a Zero Trust framework, that's where conditional access comes in. Conditional access is basically a capability of Azure Active Directory that enables you to enforce controls on the access to applications in the environment based on specific conditions from a central location. Because Azure AD is accessible from anywhere, of course, we want to make sure that wherever employees are working from, that their access, their session is being verified. You can demand stronger proof of identity for access attempts that are initiated from other unexpected locations, regions around the world, and you can even block access from certain locations. With conditional access, you can also determine device-based rules and policies, which will only allow employees access to resources if they are requesting that access from a known trusted device that has already been vetted by other controls in the environment. Client applications can also be used as a condition for accessing applications. Many applications today, since they're cloud apps, can be accessed using different app types, such as web-based apps, mobile apps, or desktop apps. Well, what if an access attempt is performed using a client app type that causes known issues? What if you require a device that is managed by IT for certain app types? Conditional access gives you that flexibility to control which client apps are allowed to access the data, the application, the resources that are being governed with Azure AD. And then there's a sign-in risk with Azure AD identity protection. You can detect those sign-in risks. You can restrict access if a detected sign-in risk indicates that it's coming from a location known as the source of a bad actor. You can also request stronger evidence that the sign-in was performed by a legitimate user. And we'll talk a little bit more in detail about identity protection a couple slides ahead here. As mentioned, conditional access is able to enforce those strong protection policies and risk assessments to grant access to employees and partners. It's again critical that only the right people with the right resources on secure devices can access the data you're securing from anywhere. As the intelligent policy engine, conditional access is built for that challenge. Its robust controls allow you to define specific conditions for how users authenticate and gain access to apps and data. And you can customize and manage automated policies and get reporting on the policies applied for each sign-in. Conditional access gives you the power to enforce the core principle of Zero Trust, which is, again, never trust, always verify. The Zero Trust security model relies on a security policy engine to make access decisions you can enforce throughout the digital estate. Identity protection, as we mentioned, is a key part of Azure AD and provides for that mechanism for ensuring that a user's request is coming from a known good location and by a user that has been vetted. It provides real-time continuous detection. It monitors security alerts that affect the organization's identities with continuous real-time and aggregated sign-in risk and user risk. IT admins can receive alerts when the user's risk reaches a specific threshold. There's the ability to do automated remediation. You can set policies to automatically block sign-ins above a certain risk threshold, for instance, high or medium. Review those alerts and automate response for common scenarios, such as requiring that a user provide stepped-up authentication if they have for instance, a low risk detection or medium risk detection. You can require that they provide MFA in order to gain access to the environment. And then there's the concept of connected intelligence, where you can investigate risky users and sign-ins to address potential vulnerabilities. Conditional access, as mentioned, is an intelligent policy that allows you to define those conditions for how users authenticate and gain access to apps and data. Identity protection lets you automatically protect against identity compromise by taking advantage of cloud intelligence powered by advanced heuristics and detections based on user and entity behavior analysis and machine learning across the Microsoft ecosystem. You just throw back there. So as shown here, that conditional access is that central part. It's receiving terabytes of identity-related security signals like user behavior, location, state of device, the application being accessed, and the risk score for user and sign-ins. Those are also analyzed. Using machine learning, the signal is analyzed and appropriately the right policy is enforced, such as whether to allow, limit, or block access, request a password reset because the user's sign-in risk is high or the password has been seen on the dark web in one of the many password data dumps that are out there. You can also create policies and apply them to external users, including business partners that agencies are collaborating with. As part of the frameworks, we mentioned about enforcing strong authentication. Of course, we know one major challenge to being able to enforce strong authentication in any environment are passwords. They're the weakest link in the security chain and a single point of failure if no additional verification is used. And that's why it's very important that in order to protect the environment, that MFA be enabled for all users in the environment. MFA, multi-factor authentication, is known to prevent 99.9% of identity attacks. And with Microsoft Azure Active Directory, it's not just one type of MFA that's supported, but several methods that can be employed. One of the newer concepts that many are pursuing is the concept of a passwordless authentication method, where users don't even have to enter a password in order to gain access to those resources. Passwordless methods help make MFA more convenient for users, and while not all MFA is currently passwordless, yet these forms of authentication can also be multi-factor authentication, such as the Microsoft Authenticator app, Windows Hello for Business, of course, FIDO2 security keys, and biometrics, such as face scanning and fingerprint scanning. Microsoft, Google, and other leaders in the industry have been developing standards to enable a simpler and stronger authentication experience across the web and mobile devices, and they've been doing that as part of the FIDO, or Fast Identity Online consortium. The recently developed FIDO2 standard enables users to authenticate easily and securely without requiring a password, which is a great way to eliminate phishing from an environment. Identity governance, of course, plays a key role. We talked about in that 12-step process to ensure that only the right people have the right access to the right resources, to ensure that they are working and are accessing information securely. Of course, we know that access is easy to grant, but it's much more harder to keep track of. It's important to be able to keep track of who was given access to what resources and revoke that access in a timely manner when it is no longer needed. Controls should apply to both internal and external users. Well, Azure AD Identity Governance, which is now a native part of Azure AD, allows you to protect, monitor, and audit access to critical assets. Specifically, it will help with the following scenarios. Ensure that only authorized users have access based on policies. Provide employees and guest users with workflows to request access. Establish regular access reviews to validate if access is still needed. And establish effective controls with time-limited access for privileged role assignments. The join, move, leave process for managing user identities is critical to get right for productivity of new hires and employees to have greater security as well. And these can be automated with identity lifecycle based events based on HR events in the system. I mentioned before how Azure AD can now natively connect with several different cloud HR providers such as Workday, SuccessFactors, and Oracle HCM. But this can also be accomplished using hybrid identity tools like Microsoft Identity Manager on-premise to connect existing systems. And as part of the joiner, mover, leaver process, that can be automated. User provisioning, onboarding and offboarding can be automated to ensure that users get the right access when they need it, when they change departments, that the previous access they had is removed and only the access they need in their new role is given. And of course, when a user separates from the environment, that the access is revoked and the user no longer has the privileges that they enjoyed while they were attached to the organization. And of course, we know identity access lifecycle is an ongoing process. Reviewing access rights over time is another critical component of identity governance. You want to give employees and partners ability to do self-service as much as possible, to request access to resources, have managers review that access for their teams and revise that access as needed. And you can find out more about identity governance by going to aka.ms/identity governance. There'll be a lot more details on the entitlement management that is now in GA. And finally, we mentioned this, but a part of identity governance, of course, is being able to provide just-in-time and just enough access for privileged roles. And Azure AD accomplishes that through Privileged Identity Manager, or management, I should say, essentially allowing you to keep the number of permanent privileged roles to a minimum, and just to those that may need access or for emergency use, but otherwise, privilege escalation goes through a rigorous process that can be self-attested to or go through a workflow where a manager has to approve elevation of privileges in order to go, for instance, from a user role to a global admin role or an exchange admin role within Azure AD. Privileged Identity Management is able to enforce the on-demand, just-in-time administrative access when needed, ensure that policies are met with alerts, audit reports, and access reviews, and manage admin access not only in Azure AD but also in Azure RBAC. Some resources before we conclude. So for government, the Azure Government blog has a wealth of information that you can get more information on this topic. There was a 6-part blog post by TJ Banasek, who put together this information. A lot of it went into this presentation, but highly encourage anyone listening to check out the Azure Gov blog there at devblogs.microsoft.com/AzureGov. Microsoft also has some accelerator workshops that we participate in as partners to help customers understand how to onboard, for instance, in this case, an identity management system using Azure AD, but there are workshops on identity, security, compliance, and endpoint management. So please feel free to reach out to us at info@oxfordcomputergroup.com or your Microsoft rep. The Azure Active Directory deployment plans are available, which provide information on how to deploy these various technologies within your environment. Get more information at aka.ms/Azure AD deployment plan. There are some Ignite sessions. We highlighted one which talks about migrating applications from on-premise or third-party identity provider solutions to Azure Active Directory. And then there's also 5 steps for integrating your apps, which again speaks further on how to get applications managed under Azure Active Directory into a single identity control plane. If you need help with any of the information you saw here today, you can feel free to reach out to us, Oxford Computer Group. As mentioned, we are working more and more with, we have several government clients to date. We're also working on obtaining our CMMC certification in time as is going to be an important part of working with the government contracts, but we do have that experience as well. Thank you for your time. If there are any questions, we can, I guess, entertain them at this time.
I think we've captured them. Thank you, Frank. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. This concludes today's webinar, and I hope everyone has a nice rest of the day.